you need to put this in place before you start the process. My name is Rick Gerard, and thanks for tuning into the Higher Power Radio Show, where our aim is to help companies solve the most difficult hiring challenges from a different perspectives. Today, our guest is Erin Wilson. Erin is the co-founder of HirePool.io. He's also a former internal recruiter and head of talent over at Brightroll as well as Yahoo. He's passionate about empowering job seekers of all backgrounds and committed to improving the world's candidate experience one interaction at a time. Erin, thank you for joining us on the show today.
Hey, Rick, thanks for having me.
Absolutely, absolutely. I'm happy to have you because you and I share, I think, similar ideals in really making sure that candidate experience, well, you're a little bit more so than me, but the candidate's needs and what they want out of their career is the focus of job searches. So let's kind of talk about what a company should do before they place an ad or start interviewing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think maybe helpful just to, I'm extremely passionate about this, but it's an important topic here because we're talking about people.
Yeah.
Right on the back end of hiring, you're talking about people. So, I think it's important to invest in this. But yeah, there are three major pieces to any headcount strategy, as far as I'm concerned. On the front end, that is, we're really talking about walking into that process. So, at a high level, I think the three areas that we want to get into today are, what I refer to as target prioritization, or in other words, how are we investing our time as an organization, and in what order? And then secondarily, user stories. So people tend to talk about job descriptions. I'd rather talk about user stories. And last but not least, the infamous kickoff. But, the meeting where we all come together to decide the action plan that we're about to put in place when it comes to hiring for a specific position. So I think those are three key areas we can dive into today.
Sure, most definitely. Well, I think just taking it a step further back too, it's really, as a company, knowing who you are and defining the process. I guess that fits into kind of what maybe the user story piece on your end.
Yeah, certainly part of it, and not just who you are, but I think sometimes organizations overlook what the hiring process in turn represents, and you're creating a perception in the market about who you are, right?
Sure.
And people believe that perception, and so but it's deeper than that. It's really, you're representing, hey, this is how we organize effort as a company. This is how we make decisions and execute against plan or what should be a strategic initiative. So it has quite a few implications if you really break it down.
Sure, most definitely. But, and again, I think from the perspective of for example, Amazon has their leadership principles by which they judge people. So they have kind of a basis to go by as to whether or not somebody has those the capabilities or basically the personality to fit in well with the company. And I don't want to say culture because culture is such an overused term these days, but environment, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So define or kind of run through those pieces for me then, like what you mean by those.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's dive in. I mean, the first thing I had mentioned was target prioritization, and I love talking in practical terms, Rick. So if you're sitting in a startup right now or at a company and you trying to get some stuff done, being able to take this away and implement it tomorrow, is really the goal here. But I think, so often hiring starts with a drive-by in the hallway, right? Hey, Rick, I need you to open up this headcount. I got to get a button seat by Monday or we're toast.
Yeah.
And I think we're really encouraging groups to take a step back and say, you think about it as a headcount plan, but we have many groups that have needs, and those needs may have job titles, but if you really break them down, there's skills, and those skills work on projects, and there's likely overlap. So, one really helpful exercise to get started is just, hey, I know that things are changing and we move loose and fast in this environment. Whether you're a startup or a top 5 internet company, in my experience, change is constant. So, I understand that much, but that doesn't give us the excuse to avoid sitting down, as a group and making sure that we're all on the same page. So when we're talking about the prioritization exercise, it's something as simple as on a Monday, sending out a Excel spreadsheet or a Google spreadsheet to all your department heads saying, do me a favor, write down, all of the hires you think you'll need in the next 3 months or 6 months. And then, the following Friday, getting into a room with those same department heads and having each one kind of go through their list and share the business need behind the hire and, how they'll apply those headcount to the bottom line of this company that we're all building and facilitate that conversation. So often I've sat in that room and heard 3 different groups say they need a data analyst. But they all have their own idea of how they're going to do that, when in reality we could be talking about a BI team for the company, right,
Sure.
or a sales ops team or something. So I think just getting in there and having people, put time and energy into an order of operations that the recruiting team is going to go execute, extremely important.
All right, so we're talking about really planning.
You got it, planning. And I think, not to get caught up on the plan part of it, right? But the communication, like the transparency and the collaboration of the leadership team around building the company. And I think that's a muscle that you got to build early, but you'll end up doing that quarterly or semi-annually or whatever your cycle is based on your needs. But just doing it collaboratively and consistently is really the key there, not the spreadsheet.
And you also have to coach the managers, or the managers should be prepared to find the right person as opposed to just getting a button-at seat, so to speak. I think that's where bad hiring decisions are made, because they have that need, and that need overwhelms the fact that that person doesn't fit with the company.
Well, absolutely, and you box yourself into a transactional decision, right? Not a reactionary one.
So true.
Oh, I need to hire, I'll hire this person that solves what I need now.
Yep.
And that's where you end up with 6 to 12 month job tenure, not always the employee's fault, right?
Yeah.
So, good call out there.
All right. So then we go to user story. Why is that important for a company?
Yeah, user story. So, I steal everything. In this case, I stole it from product managers and engineers, who build world-class products, and they'll tell you how important it is to understand your audience and that person or their persona and the user story, right, or sort of the experience that you want to deliver. And I think when you're hiring, it's very much similar. So you start with this prioritization. You have, a macro strategy, but then you have to extrapolate each position in a meaningful way. I mean, again, to come back to why it's important, these are people we're talking about. This is their career. And so investing a bit of thought into that. So as an example, again, what's common? Hey, Rick, I really need to open this role. Can you go ahead and throw out that job description so we can get a pipeline going? And as opposed to what I consider a user story, which is just a bit more thoughtful exercise. Hey, I understand you want to hire. Here are some questions that are going to give us more dimensionality around this hire and what they'll be doing day to day, what they'll be doing early in the role, who they'll be interacting with. Most people are dependent on other teams. So what does cross-functional execution look like? What are the dependencies for them to be successful? And even diving as deep as what tools and systems they might use or how they measure outcomes. But I think part of that is just having the hiring manager having answers to those questions, right?
Yeah.
Having thought enough about the hire to be able to speak to them, and then.
So then your user story then is kind of focused in on what the job and what the story of the company is. Then, correct?
That's right.
Okay.
In a more authentic and again 3-dimensional way. Yeah.
Got it. And then your third piece was the kickoff meeting, right? Or kind of.
Yeah, the kickoff.
Okay.
Just in making those really count, right? I think oftentimes you see, we've hired 3 engineers, so we don't need a kickoff meeting for the 4th. And I think, when trying to impress upon people that every hire is unique, unless you're hiring clones, which I don't think we're quite there yet. So really taking time in that kickoff to develop a new narrative for a new hire, but really making it, again, collaborative, making it a working session. So when you get into them, you're doing things like reviewing that user story and talking about needs, but what is the interview panel, what is the interview plan for this hire? Who's going to cover which interviews? What are the objectives of those interviews? And then even, on the back end of that meeting, getting into some live sourcing and really start collaborating as a team against the market. So often people give you a list of requirements but don't understand what that means for the population, right, or the reach you have to go try and find the right hire. So it's been really interesting to do, and just finish on this note, have your talent team do some live sourcing with the hiring manager and show them, well, if I enter your variables into LinkedIn, of the 450, 500 million people in the world, here's the pool we're working with.
And if it's a limited pool, you're kind of screwed, right? I mean, you have to set expectations properly.
Yeah, and I don't, and I think my first gut isn't to tell people you're wrong and we can't do it. It's just a matter of transparency and understanding, right? Okay, you understand that there's only 100 people like that.
Yeah.
We're going to screen X percentage based on historical data, which means you have 10. And then every time you ding one of them, we just lost 10% of our market.
Very true.
It's okay. Just understand.
Yeah.
It is finite.
Now, in that kickoff meeting, you're also gaining commitment buy-in from the hiring managers, correct?
Oh, absolutely. I think I can be a little strong on this side of the discussion, but we don't serve people. We're a team that works with you.
Yeah.
So, you got to show up to the meeting. You got to be ready to go.
Absolutely. All right. So we are talking to Erin Wilson, founder of HirePool.io, and we just discussed why it's important to be, not just winging it in the hiring process. So we need to take a quick break, but when we come back, we're going to really lay out for you a framework that you as a company can use today to significantly increase your ability to hire the most powerful talent for your company. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Hire Power with Rick Girard, giving you access to recruiting techniques that will help you hire key talent to build your company towards real success. Rick is a recruiting executive and entrepreneur who's been successfully recruiting in the aggressive Silicon Valley technology landscape for the past 2 decades. After a very successful stint at Apogee, he founded Stride Search in 2012. Based on a lean efficiency model, Stride has uniquely positioned itself as a leader in retained search for the most critical talent hires within a small organization. Whether you're a startup executive or recruiting professional, by listening to Hire Power with Rick Girard, you will walk away with skills to help you attract and hire great talent. Now back to Hire Power with Rick Girard.
Welcome back to the show. So you're listening to Hire Power, and I'm your host, Rick Girard. We're talking to Erin Wilson, founder of HirePool.io. Before the break, we were discussing the why to having a hiring process in place. And now we're going to share our processes with you as a company so that you can implement a winning campaign today. So Erin, thanks again for being here. So now that we kind of understand the importance of putting a foundation in place prior to talking to anybody, let's kind of provide a framework I think that needs to be in place for a company. So lay out for me, if you could, kind of, if I'm a new startup, maybe I don't have recruiting resources, what do I do?
Yeah, it's a good question, man. I think a lot about the interview process like the internet. And I think it's been described in the past as designed for flexibility, architected for scale.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where I come in on the hiring process. I think whether you're 1 or 100 people, the same things are important. You need to be consistent. It needs to be repeatable. It needs to be measurable.
Yep.
And I think the way that we get there is by, again, putting thought into it on the front end, which sometimes seems out of place, but always investing up front because it's such an important hire or move in your company, and start to knock out the pieces that you believe every candidate should experience. So, for example, walking into hiring process knowing that, say, 60% of the candidate experience you're going to deliver is fixed. It is the same for every single position you hire for in that company, whether it's an admin or an executive.
Mm-hmm.
And that can be as simple as your first round interaction with talent is the same, your on-site workflow is the same, the number of interviews you do, 2 calls and an on-site is the same.
Yeah.
So to that extent, I think being very consistent and measurable is the only way to really know if you're doing good or not, right? And constantly striving to improve it. And then, of course, you need some level of flexibility because an admin and an engineer aren't the same.
Yeah.
So there's some flexibility there.
That's so true. So in your mind, the other 40% would be that flexible piece as to, because the process for an executive is going to be much longer than an admin.
Yeah, correct. I think
You
have some time allocation that's going to be a variable, and then you also have just domain expertise. So if you think about your on-site interview, the on-site might be the same for every candidate to the extent that they're greeted the same way. They have nearly the same number of interactions, but the content in those final round interactions are going to be domain specific. The number of hours invested, in passing those interviews should be appropriately correlated to the role, et cetera.
Okay. So, from my perspective, what I like to tend to do too, and it's very similar, by the way, just going back to defining the principles, making sure that you have a core basis to go by, or a measuring stick, so to speak. And then, of course, target identification. I think companies don't utilize their resources they already have that much. People like you and I come in, and of course, the first thing we work is employee referrals, right? But I don't think a lot of companies think to work through that piece of it.
Yeah, no, it's a great call out, Rick. And, when they do, again, it tends to be more transactional, reactionary.
Yeah.
Hey, guys, super hot job. Tell me the security engineers you know.
Yeah.
As opposed to constantly sharing where you are as an organization and where you're going so that your team can be actively thinking about how to build the organization around them. There's a sort of a simple analogy I use all the time. A lot of times you'll hear someone say, hey, do you know anybody that's looking? Or do you know any engineers? And, if you ask me if I know anyone, I probably don't have much feedback for you, even though I know more than one person.
Yeah.
But if you say, hey, do you know anybody who's, smart in the talent space that lives in Orange County that has access to a podcast? Okay, now my mental Rolodex is spinning, and Rick Gerard comes to mind.
Sure.
So, I think, are you going the
Thanks for the plug, I appreciate it.
Yeah. Are you going the extra mile to communicate that,
right.
To take us back to user stories,
sure.
right? That there's something like that comes back full circle.
Sure. Okay. So then what would be the next piece that you would have a company put in place?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing here is just a culture of collaboration and transparency, throughout the process, and a culture of feedback.
Sure.
All as it relates to the hiring manager, to the hiring process. But you have candidates that invest countless hours preparing for your company, for your interviews,
sure,
doing your take-home assignments, etc. And then, in most cases, companies just decide, hey, we're not going to move forward, and they let it go. And it's such a learning opportunity, to really collect that 360 feedback. So I think, one, just hey, hiring isn't a talent thing; it's a everybody thing. And so tackling that problem as a team.
Yeah.
And then two, being in the habit of intellectual honesty and feedback always.
Yeah.
Those are the next big rocks.
And a piece that I like to kind of throw into this too would be engagement, right? The importance of how you engage a potential person to work for your company. I take it from a perspective of I want to uncover what that person's career wound is before I really start talking to them about my job that I'm trying to fill. And because without some sort of trigger event or really kind of career wound that we can help heal, I find that you spend a lot of time spinning wheels on candidates that really aren't ready to make a move. I don't know if you know.
Yeah, no, 100%.
And companies do that a lot.
Yeah, I think, I've spoken to some large number of job seekers, and the conversation always starts with, "So what do you want?"
Yeah.
You know, and just hearing them out, and there's that added wrinkle of making sure you hear what they say and not what you want to hear.
Yeah.
Right? So I think.
Yeah.
But it's a great place to stay. If you really listen to the answer to that question, you're going to understand things like motivation, timeline, right, and how genuinely interested they are. I mean, I can't tell you how many times someone said, "I thought we had them." You know, they were 99% sure they were going to come here, and had you listened to the first time you asked that question, you would have known you were number 2 or 3 all along. You know?
Or number 5 or 6. I mean, especially if somebody's actively in the job market, right?
That's right. Yeah.
And here's a key thing: if you front load your interview, where you spend time getting to know that person up front, you're going to get a lot more information that's going to help you down the end than you are if you try and ask those questions at the end of the process, because people become very tight-lipped once an offer is in place.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
You want to establish that trust and rapport
Absolutely.
the first time you interact, you know, and I think you make a great point that when you have that information and you're coming to the 11th hour, it's really easy to, you know, how they say close, but you don't actually have to close.
Yeah.
Because
there's no closing,
you know
it's
what
opening.
They want, you've delivered it. Exactly. You're opening the next chapter in their career.
Yeah.
But I think to go back for a second, it's also really valuable in the first call, because you talk to job seekers, and it's an active market that we're in, and you know, you hear things like, "Oh, I'm going to take my time. You know, I'm going to give it a few weeks," or what have you, and that's all true until it's not, right? Until they meet one company that they are truly interested in, then however long that company's process will take, that's how much time you have.
Yeah.
So the way I would encourage my talent teams is, your job in that first call is to buy sand, like sand from an hourglass. I need enough sand to get them through our process so that they can see why this is a great opportunity based on what they want. And the only way you're going to do that is if you listen and ensure that established connection in the first call.
Okay, I love the buy-in sand thing. I'm going to steal that from you.
That's all right. I'm sure I stole it from somebody else, as mentioned.
All right, cool. You know, and I think it's really important, too, that as you are having these conversations with people, that you are honest, and if it's not the right fit for your company, you let them know, rather than trying to fit a square peg in a round hole. I mean, if it's just not going to be a cultural match or a skills match, or not even, you know, no matter how bad the hiring manager might want this person, you've got to be the one to make that call.
Yeah, totally. And you know, not to be repetitive, but back to target prioritization.
Yeah.
Right. Love where this comes into play, because now you can not only give them the feedback now, but you can be really clear about at least the near-term future, you know, and keep that close. But I think it's hard to give feedback, Rick. So people struggle with, you know, can I say it, or how do I say it? And something I've used in my experience that's worked is just, you know, people are used to working in teams, and there's some shared knowledge around what number in that team you are. So, example, if you're the first person in a team, typically you're going to be expected to have more experience, because you're either standing up that initiative or that team. So when you're talking to people, being able to say, hey, we like you, but, you know, this is number 2 in the team, and we think you'd be really great as a number 4 based on our ability to support you, right? Our resources to invest in your growth and have you step up. People typically accept that feedback very well, because, again, it's known environment. So yeah, I think that there's something to be done there.
And you're keying upon something that I have noted, which is a feedback channel, right? So how will what's your recommendation on how a company will actually set up a really effective feedback channel?
Yeah. So first of all, scale is an important variable in that. So I'll try to touch on a few elements, but. You know, I think the first part of a feedback channel to the candidate is your internal channel. So how are you getting feedback from the interviewers to yourself? And, you know, thankfully some modern ATSs have better workflow for that, you know, than the old school ones.
Sure.
But let's assume you're getting that feedback. You know, if you've done some of the steps we've talked about in this call, in your first round interview, when the talent team talks to the candidate, by the end of that phone call, the talent team should be in a position to let the candidate know directly whether they're moving forward or not.
Absolutely.
Most of the time.
Yeah.
Right? If they're coming on site, I'm a big believer that that person, if they want it, deserves constructive feedback, and I would highly prefer that in a phone call. Something more personal, something that shows you're willing to invest time to close this out on the right foot.
And maybe a little coaching too, right?
Right, and exactly, and coaching. Yeah. And I think, something that has worked as a nice bridge between the interviewing team and the job seekers for me in the past is saying to the interviewing team, hey, I'm going to get on a call with Rick. I'm going to let him know we're not moving forward. I know we have some feedback, but as a team, can we just isolate one thing Rick can do better in his next interview? And that way, when I get into that call, I've got some context, which is just fact. It's just what happened.
Sure.
And then you have verdict, right? And hopefully that one piece that you gathered, that's you coaching them how to go kill it in the next interview.
Yeah. And I think one piece to add to this, again, is timeline, right? Establish a timeline with your internal channel. Look at, we need to provide feedback to this person within 48 hours. I always have the candidate call me after the interview on the way back. Beat their call back to me so that, at least we have that communication channel. I can debrief that person. And of course, sticking to that timeline is pretty key as far as making sure that your company is giving the best candidate experience as well.
Oh, absolutely. And if you were supposed to deliver a project to a customer,
yeah,
I'm pretty sure you wouldn't pass that deadline and just not give the customer an update.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? Like when money's on the line, all of a sudden you have content, right? So I know that there isn't money on the line per se, but these days with Glassdoor and technology forcing the issue of candidate experience, you might as well consider it money on the line.
So true. And then I'm just going to touch upon two really quick things because we're almost running out of time here. But offer, with that timeline, talking about, well, actually, after the interview, setting up that feedback channel, making sure that you start kind of prepping for an offer. And when we get to the offer stage, make sure you discuss start date, discuss counter offers, which, that's a whole nother episode. Reconfirmed kind of their wound and agree on money. And usually when it comes down to it, if the opportunity is the right thing for the person's career, the money works itself out.
100%. 100%.
Yeah.
I mean, there's plenty of studies that show money's not in the top three, for most top performers anyways. And I think, at least in my experience, as long as the company's being fair and the job seeker truly wants the opportunity, the money always works itself out.
So very true. Erin, man, thank you so much for your time investment today and sharing your knowledge with the Higher Power Radio community. Now,
thanks for having me, Rick.
Oh, absolutely. Now, if anybody would like to find out more about your company or get in touch with you, how do they reach you?
Yeah, you guys can reach me. LinkedIn is probably the quickest way. You can get me on there. I'm pretty responsive.
You're really responsive on Twitter, too.
Yeah, or Twitter, or Quora, or email, or text. But yeah, now any of that works. And if you want to check out HirePool, either shoot me a note, ew@hirepool.io, or jump on the wait list, and we clear it every few days, so you'll be in before no time.
Oh, sounds great. So I want to thank our listening audience for tuning in today to the Higher Power Radio Show. Quick thanks to our team. We have our engineer, Paul Roberts, our producers, Joan Park, Haley Stern, Shanti Ryle, and our executive producer, Kim Iverson. To listen to this show and any other past episodes, check out our website, which is powerradio.com, or Higher Power Radio on iTunes. And for the latest insights on the show, you can follow our Facebook page, which is Higher Power Radio Show, or check out our blog on stridesearch.com. So I want to thank you for being here. Tune in next week. We have a really outstanding guest. It's going to be a surprise guest next week. I'm your host, Rick Girard, and you've been listening to the Higher Power Radio Show. Aloha.
Thank you for listening to Higher Power with Rick Girard on OC Talk Radio.